everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Eva. Today I will not be doing a video essay because last week I decided to reread Wuthering Heights and I have thoughts that I want to share with you. First of all, this is one of my favorite novels and I regret not having read this before because this time when I read it I could appreciate much better the story. I think that this is one of those books that I'm going to read every year. So Wuthering Heights was one of the first English books I ever read. It was actually the second English classic that I read. The first one was Jane Eyre, because my English reading comprehension was not very good at that time and I was reading an English classic. There were many words that I couldn't understand, especially when I was reading Jane Eyre. So what I do when I don't understand a word is that I circle the word and then I write the word on top of the page and write the definition. Now, I did that with Jane Eyre, but by the time I finished the book, I was so exhausted of doing that I didn't want to do the same with Wuthering Heights because I wanted to enjoy the reading experience. So I didn't annotate this book. When I read this book last week, I realized that the first time I didn't even highlight the passages that I liked. The positive side of that is that I got to enjoy my reading experience last week a lot. I also, like the first time I read this novel, I understood 85% of it. This time I understood everything. My perspective of this novel also changed a lot. So I no longer think that this is a romance. I think this is a story of revenge, which contains a love story. This is also a story about how unrestrained love can destroy people. I think one of the reasons why people either love or hate this story is that all of the characters are flawed and unvirtuous. Another thing that I realized while reading this book for a second time is rather an unpopular opinion. So please don't hate me for this. I'm not trying to convince you of anything, I'm just trying to express my thoughts on the novel. So many people believe that the reason why Heathcliff and Catherine's relationship is so intense is that they never consummated their love, so they never have sex. This theory is very solid because certainly the text never suggests otherwise. Now, the problem with this argument is that it doesn't consider many other things, and that's why I'm trying to challenge this theory. And also because I think that Emily Brontë wanted to leave this up to interpretation. Now, my reasons to believe this are numerous. Let's check first what the text is telling us. So, first of all, Heathcliff's and Cassie's relationship is very physical. They are always kissing, touching, and embracing. They also spend a lot of time alone. Now, the other thing is that we have a peripheral narrator. Nellie is the one telling us their story. Now, the thing with this is that Nellie gets the reader close enough to Heathcliff and Catherine to show us their relationship dynamic. But we never get close enough to see what happens intimately. We don't get the chance because, Nellie is not part of their relationship. The text also tells us that there are many things Nellie ignores. And we see this when Kathy's daughter sneaks out to Wuthering Heights. She does this for a month and Nellie only realizes like 1 or 2 months later. So there are many things that are happening in secret in Wuthering Heights, but that Nellie doesn't know. She can only know what the characters tell her. The other thing is that the story happens at the end of the 18th century, not during the Victorian era. And I think this is very important because during the 18th century, women had more freedom than during the Victorian era. So I guess that allowed Emily Brontë to play with the ways in which her female characters act in Wuthering Heights. And this leads me to the social context. Not only do we need to see how the social context affects the way that Emily Brontë is writing her story, we also need to understand how the social conventions of the Victorian era influence the text. So, first of all, it would have been extremely rare for a female author to write a sex scene, and even to suggest that something sexual is happening. And sex doesn't even need to be mentioned in a story to lead the readers to understand that it happens. For instance, in many so-called clean romances. We never have sexual depictions. Sex is never even mentioned because it's up to interpretation. It's up to the reader to put the pieces together. There is also the fact that if Emily Brontë would have written a sex scene, even if it wasn't an explicit sex scene, it would have made Catherine's character extremely unvirtuous, even though she's not said to be a virtuous character. But that will lead to a lot of backlash from the Victorian era society, and no woman would have sympathized with Catherine's character. Now, that being said, Emily didn't attempt to make of Catherine a virtuous character. She's actually said to be a very unvirtuous character, according to the conventions of the Victorian era. And we see this from the very beginning when she is a child. So there is this part where her father asks Catherine, "Why canst thou not always be a good lass, Cathy?" And she replies, "Why cannot you always be a good man, father?" So what Emily is telling us here is that Catherine is said to be a free spirit. She is going to defy our Victorian era readers' expectations on what a female character is supposed to be. And Cathy makes it very clear that she's only marrying Linton to have money and power, and she plans to make Heathcliff her lover. And she thinks that Linton is going to accept her conditions. I also think she is attracted to Linton, but I don't think that she actually loves him. The other reason why I think Emily doesn't allude to any sex scenes between Catherine and Heathcliff is that she doesn't want us to question Catherine Linton's parentage. And this is for obvious reasons. It will be an extremely controversial situation if Cathy's daughter ends up getting married to Linton and we question her parentage, because that means that she is getting married to her half-brother. And Wuthering Heights, as it is, already has lots of pseudo-incest. And I'm calling the whole cousin relationship pseudo-incest because in this era it wasn't considered bad to marry your cousin. At least at the end of the 18th century it wasn't. During the Victorian era it was a bit more controversial in the sense that it was considered unfashionable or tacky, but it wasn't even really a big deal, not as it is today. And I think this is one of the reasons why Emily Brontë decided to set the story at the end of the 18th century and not during the 19th century. Okay, so now moving to the revenge plot. I think both Catherine and Heathcliff are punishing each other in a way. By basically killing herself, Catherine wants to punish Linton and Heathcliff because they didn't go along well, and that's not what she expected, that's not what she wanted. And she's used to people doing whatever she wants them to do. And also I think that Heathcliff's words to Catherine when she is dying are very harsh words. I think he's right to a certain point. She did this to herself, it wasn't anyone else who did it. At the same time, a part of me thinks that Heathcliff is taking revenge against Cathy in a way. Like, to me, this is a situation in which the man is punching a wall because he doesn't want to hit the woman. So he's destroying everything around her. It's not just a resentment against society, he is resented against her as well, which makes their love and relationship more complicated. We know that he goes away because he hears her telling Nellie that he's a brute, he's uneducated, he no longer entertains her, and he's going to be poor, but she still loves him. Apparently he never hears the part where she tells Nellie that she loves him, but he hears the rest, which, even though she loves him, it's still a brutal thing to say. And that's the reason why he goes away. He does it to prove her that he can become an educated man and that he can become a wealthy man, and he succeeds. One of the things that I love about this story, and one of the things that I love about Heathcliff, is how unapologetic he is. He's taking revenge basically against everyone. He is resented and he wants to punish everyone without an excuse, even those who are innocent. I feel that that's a very cool thing to do and different thing to do with a character. I also think that it's very interesting how the victim turns into the victimizer. Heathcliff does to Hatton what Hindley did to him, and the irony of it is that Hatton ends up reminding Heathcliff of himself. And although he doesn't like to admit it, he loves Hatton, but he doesn't love his own child. Hatton's appearance is also very similar to Catherine. His features remind Heathcliff of her, while his circumstances, the way he acts, the way Heathcliff has degraded him, reminds Heathcliff of himself. So I guess Hatton symbolizes the child that Heathcliff and Catherine couldn't have. And I think this is what ultimately stops Heathcliff from taking his revenge any further. It also makes no sense to him to punish someone that has nothing to do with the people who hurt him in the past. He can no longer find meaning in his anger and in his revenge. And that's why he lets himself die. One of the things that I noticed this time that I read the novel was how many paranormal elements it has. It has dreams, omens, and ghosts. We also have moon and moonlight symbolism. And one of the strangest things is that Heathcliff and Catherine are occasionally associated to vampires and ghouls. And I think this makes much sense because through their actions, they suck up the life force of their families. On the one hand, when Catherine dies, Heathcliff's humanity dies with her, because regardless of his actions, she always sees him as a human, as a person, and she never stops loving him. She also doesn't love him blindly. She knows who he is. But once she dies, no one can see his human side anymore, and Heathcliff becomes dead inside. On the other hand, Heathcliff asks Cathy to hunt him, and Cathy's soul cannot rest. So they are both in a way symbolic revenants. There's also a whole thing with Heathcliff desecrating Cathy's grave, which is really creepy and like, you don't do that. If there's something we can learn from Wuthering Heights is that love is more complex than we think it is. And I think society has idealized love in the sense that the only way we can think about love is when the feeling is pure and healthy. But that is not the case because we are human and we are much more complex than that. For instance, if we think about happiness, you can be happy when something really good happens to your friend. But you can also be a terrible person and be happy when something horrible happens to your friend. So it is still happiness, but the place from where it comes from is different. And the same happens with love. And I think that the book is trying to show us that there are different types of love. We have the love of Catherine and Heathcliff, which is intense and unmeasurable and unrestrained. And I say this because Heathcliff and Catherine never learned to love in moderation. Theirs is a love not learned in a ballroom, but in the malls. Their love really has no boundaries. We also have the love of Edgar Linton to Catherine, which is a very dutiful love, loyal love. Just look at this passage where Nellie is telling Heathcliff that Catherine's appearance is changed greatly, her character much more, and the person who is compelled of necessity to be her companion will only sustain his affection hereafter by the remembrance of what she once was, by common humanity and a sense of duty. Heathcliff is disgusted by this because he cannot fathom taking care of Catherine out of duty. His love to her is so intense and unconditional that he doesn't need duty to care for her. That's how I read it, at least. He says, "That is quite impossible. Quite possible that your master should have nothing but common humanity and a sense of duty to fall back upon. Do you imagine that I shall leave Catherine to his duty and humanity? And can you compare my feelings respecting Catherine to his?" He also goes on saying that for every thought Catherine spends on Linton, she spends 1,000 on Heathcliff, and that if Linton loved with all the powers of his puny being, he couldn't love as much in 80 years as Heathcliff could love in a day. So the thing with these passages is that we see once again that their love is characterized by excess. There's nothing that can really compare to the way they are connected. And I think because of this, we need to see Catherine and Heathcliff as a unity, not as a couple. You can read Catherine and Linton as a couple because that's what they are, but Catherine and Heathcliff are a unity. There's also Isabella's love to Heathcliff, which is more about infatuation and being blind. And lastly, there's Catherine Linton's love to Hatton, which is more of a down-to-earth love and unconditional love. And their love, it's what basically redeems the story. They show us a more healthy version of love in the way that they both recognize that they have their flaws. They work together to improve themselves. Cathy begins to help Hatton to learn how to read and how to write. And they also accept that there are things about each other that they don't like. So those are all my thoughts about Wuthering Heights. Please let me know in the comments what you think about all my unpopular ideas. Once again, thank you so much for watching. I wish you a wonderful week and I'll see you next week. Bye!